We affirm our sole contention is that investing in infrastructure revitalizes the middle class. Robert Reich of UC Berkeley explains that rising income inequality stems from upward redistribution, a dramatic increase in the political power of large corporations and Wall Street to change the rules of the market for their personal gain while siphoning money away from average working people. As Wright continues, along with this power has come disproportionate influence for the rich and the steady loss in economic bargaining power of the middle class. Indeed, it is indisputable that rising income inequality has hit the middle class the hardest. As Michael Fletcher of the Washington Post finds, median wealth for middle-income families declined 29% between 2001 and 2013. Elise Gould of the Economic Policy Institute furthers that the growth of income inequality between 1979 and 2007 has reduced middle-class incomes by almost $18,000 a year. These losses are so crippling because, as Reich explains, the weaker unions and other traditional sources of countervailing power become economically, the less they are able to exert political influence, which causes the playing field to tilt even further against average workers and the poor. Thus, the most direct and impactful means of alleviating inequalities to revitalize the middle class and their political power will increased infrastructure development meets in three key ways. First, through reduced costs. The Department of Treasury explains that improving our nation's infrastructure can save middle-class families by mitigating costs associated with congestion and car maintenance. In fact, as they find empirically, solving for poor road conditions would save the average motorist $400 a year, and access to public transportation would save the average household over $6,000 a year. Second, through increasing property values. As Paul London of the Huffington Post reports, the recession caused the prices of homes to fall 40% nationwide, wiping out 40 or 50% of the net worth of middle-class households. The result, as London furthers, is that middle-class consumers no longer have collateral that will allow them to spend the way they did before the collapse. Fortunately, as the National Economic Council finds in a study of several areas, including Dallas, Chicago, and San Diego, infrastructure investment in light rail systems by increasing an area's quality of life boost local property values by 25%. London concludes that the only way to overcome the impacts of the housing crash is government spending on infrastructure. Third, through job creation. Elizabeth McNichol of the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities writes that infrastructure investment boosts employment by generating hundreds of well-paying jobs in construction and long-term maintenance. In addition to creating jobs directly, infrastructure investment, as Business Roundtable observes, would also boost America's international competitiveness, attracting foreign direct investment to U.S. shores. All in all, Josh Bibbins of the Economic Policy Institute concludes that a $250 billion investment in infrastructure would create 3 million jobs. Notably, as the DOT explains, nearly 90% of the jobs most affected by infrastructure spending would go to the middle class. As Jennifer Erickson of the Center for American Progress furthers, most middle-class families derive their incomes from jobs as opposed to investments, meaning creating jobs is the best route to stop the shrinking of the middle class. Ultimately, strengthening the middle class is crucial, because as Nick Bunker of the Center for American Progress explains, a strong middle class fosters better governance by helping ensure the government is well run, increasing citizen participation, and promoting policies for the benefit of all society rather than special interests, furthering that when the middle class is strong, it has the political power to achieve its goals. Indeed, as Norman Loyoza of the World Bank confirms empirically in a study of 128 countries, as the middle class grows, democratic participation increases and corruption decreases. Furthermore, as PBS reports, Americans consider inequality the world's greatest danger, indicating that it will likely be the primary target of this new surge in political power. This is essential because, as Reich explains, the answer to income inequality must be achieved politically. He continues that the trend towards widening inequality can only be reversed if the disenfranchised majority demands fundamental change. Because infrastructure investment acts as the catalyst for this change, we are proud to affirm.
I see the property values boosted by 25% on the light rail system.
Yep.
And then,
Okay. There you go. Actually, do you mind if I
Yeah,
get
that's
it
fine.
back?
That's
Oh, yeah,
fine.
just I want to have it during the speech. Tires. Save me from an embarrassing trip.
Okay, is everybody ready?
1 second, sorry.
Yeah, actually, just like intros. Okay. Yeah, I'm ready to go. Alright, you guys.
We were ready, yeah.
Read Gate. Contention 1 is entrenching supremacy. Bullard of Texas Southern University writes that for the last few decades, racial prejudice has been the principal decision maker behind infrastructure-related policies in the United States. Historically, the New York Times explains that government housing policies have pushed minorities into segregated inner-city neighborhoods with high poverty rates and few opportunities for escape. According to McCarthy of Smith College, this ongoing American legacy of institutional racism has denied millions of blacks the infrastructure necessary to address unemployment, political exploitation, and other social problems. Prioritizing infrastructure magnifies this oppression in two ways. First is a distribution gap. Avila of the University of Minnesota argues that the financing of infrastructure follows the inscriptions of race and class. While spending within affluent communities is generous, it is minimal or absent in regions where the poor are historically concentrated. Randazzo of the Reason Foundation confirms that more than 85% of all government infrastructure grants went to communities with household incomes far above the national average. Second is urban dislocation. Soman at the George Mason University observes that governments typically use new infrastructure projects as excuses to target and remove racial minorities. Lipsitz of UC Santa Barbara empirically confirms that federally assisted renewal projects destroy black housing units 2 times more often than white ones. Dislocation intensifies inequality, as Hartman of the American Bar Association points out that the cost of living for those forced out of their homes is 53% higher. Fortunately, means tests and programs are colorblind. The Center for Welfare Information explains that welfare eligibility is open to every citizen in the United States with a guarantee of equal opportunity. Contention 2 is the safety net. Pettinger of the State Center for American Health contends that the primary purpose of welfare is to maintain a minimum standard of living for those suffering difficult times to foster upward mobility later down the road. Because most families deal with some forms of economic hardship at one time or the other, Steinberg of the Center for American Progress finds that 70% of Americans benefit from social safety net programs at some point in their lives. Expanding welfare helps the poor bounce back up in 3 ways. First is subsidizing jobs keepers. The CWI explains that one of the basic criteria for means-tested welfare is that receptionists work towards someday leaving the program. Jobless Americans fall back on welfare to survive in the short term so they can find jobs in the long term. This is important because Lieber of MIT finds that citing poverty makes people more short-sighted. Those who live without their basic needs are more likely to make ill-advised decisions that benefit them sooner than later. Fortunately, Jusko of Stanford explains that the safety net provides around 47% of the financial support necessary to cover an entire family's basic needs, freeing up time and resources for the poor and altering their decision calculus. DeParley of the New York Times thus impacts that expanding welfare in 2008 cut joblessness by 21%, while the U.S. Department of Commerce quantifies that most recipients are off welfare in less than 2 years. Second is breaking the cycle. Greenstein of the Center for Budget and Policy Priorities explains that welfare helps families with children afford basic necessities to improve longer-term outcomes. The social safety net reduces the burst of stress factors that parents and children experience if they can't put food on the table, thereby easing negative effects that poverty can have on children's brain development. The CDF confirms that expanding underfunded welfare programs would reduce child poverty by 60% and increase access for 43 million kids. Welfare reduces intergenerational poverty, as people are 3 times more likely to be poor at some point in their life after experiencing poverty early in life. But third is encouraging entrepreneurship. Smith of the Microfinance Institute warns that for those with limited resources, business ownership is inherently unstable as market dynamics can constantly change. Expanding the welfare state promotes enterprise by reducing the risk of financial failure among poor households. Noble of Harvard University empirically confirms that the expansion of means-tested welfare programs in the early 2000s increased entrepreneurship by 16% among eligible households. This combats inequality, as Levinsky of the Goldwater Institute quantifies that for every 1% increase in entrepreneurship, there is a 2% decrease in poverty. Cumulatively, Sherman of the CVPP concludes that means-tested benefits have lifted 19 million people above the poverty line, while the holistic safety net has cut potential incidences of poverty in half. However, it is still in need of expansion, as Coven of the Nonprofit Quarterly reports that Congress has turned a deaf ear to safety net programs, with funding requests for welfare billions of dollars below budgetary requests. And for these reasons, we're proud to engage.
Can I get those cards now, or do you still need
Wait, can I want to prep link you?
it? Then it's fine.
Alright. Should we ever build infrastructure?
Should be yes.
Okay, so like I'm seeing like a flaw in the logic based on your case, right? You're saying like we shouldn't build infrastructure
No.
because it's racist, right?
No, that's not what we're saying. We're saying that infrastructure right now is racist, and if we want to alleviate income inequality, that's not what we should be prioritizing, because logically, putting more money into a flawed system will just make it even more flawed. Can I take a question?
Yeah, sure.
So, do you agree that we should also be trying to reduce poverty? I mean, like, benefiting the middle class is cool, but do you think that we should also be helping the poor?
No, I say that the best way
So
to
no,
alleviate
that's your
income
answer.
inequality is through the middle class, right?
Alright.
When you help the poor, like, get out of poverty, it doesn't actually have widespread impacts to income inequality. We tell you the only way to do that is by revitalizing the middle class.
Why do you think that taking the poor out of poverty doesn't benefit income inequality?
Why? Because Reich tells you that the only way to solve for income inequality is with a lasting political solution, right?
Okay.
All your methods are like short term.
So you say that like bolstering the middle class will lead to political solutions.
Yes.
But why would the middle class push for political solutions to help the poor?
Because what they see basically is that the upper class is oppressing them and the lower classes. And when they have political influence to do so, they take advantage of that and create policies for all of society rather than special interests.
Okay, that is just plain rhetoric.
No,
First of all, you don't have an author that says that, but second,
yes,
the
we
poor
do. We
think-
have like 3 authors.
The poor thinks that the middle class is oppressing them as well, and that the middle class gets bolstered by like infrastructure
Who
development.
says that the middle? No. Like
Okay,
you have
but
we give you evidence saying
Okay.
that like people feel oppressed by the upper classes.
Okay.
It's not the other way around.
Right,
Like,
but you don't give me evidence that says that the middle class would be incentivized to help the poor. That is something that is absent
yes,
from
we
the
do.
case.
Bunker tells you that a strong middle class fosters governance by helping ensure the government is well run, increasing citizen participation, and promoting policies for all the benefit of all society rather than special interests. It's
Bunker
clearly
says that word for word, or is that
Yes,
what it
you
says
can
in
call the
case?
card afterwards.
Okay, I'd like to call it.
All right. Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So what's the difference between helping benefit poverty and benefiting income inequality?
That's what I was just trying to say. Like the only way to prevent, like actually benefit income inequality is by pulling people out of
Because the
poor.
difference
But
between
the biggest
income
difference in
inequality is
income-
it's a statistical
Okay,
measure.
let me answer your question first. The biggest difference in income in like the economy is going to be between the richest people and the poor people. And like closing that gap is the best way to meet the resolution of burden.
No, because we tell you that the best way to have a widespread solution is by helping the middle class and then helping lower
Alright,
classes.
so what I'm getting is that the final impact of this like political movement is going to be helping the poor.
Middle class and poor.
But
Ask a
like,
question.
it's going to like the final way to alleviate income inequality is by helping the poor, right?
A lasting solution for you. Yes.
Okay.
Can I ask a question? Like
No,
you
you
didn't really.
just took a question.
I know, but you didn't really answer the difference between income inequality and like poverty, right? When you income
I don't think
when
there
you
is a
impact
difference. I think that alleviating
no, when
poverty
you
is the way
impact
to
to
go.
poverty, it's specifically about like usually human like conditions, basically quality of life, right? And
There's
income
also a
inequality is a
poverty line
statistical measure of
like income.
No, it's different because reducing income inequality doesn't mean you're reducing poverty.
So,
Okay, yeah, can you add the bumper card to the list of items?
Yes.
And is that the card that you read at the bottom that says that like if we don't increase participation, then like inequality growth is going to be like targeted by the rich? Is that what it says?
No,
It's
What's the
bunker.
card at the bottom?
Okay, bunker.
Reich.
Wait, the last card.
Yeah.
That's Reich.
Oh, okay, yeah, and that too. So 3.
So you need bunker, Reich, and what was the first one again?
And the 25% light rails thing.
Oh.
Yeah. And like you can give that to me before my call.
Okay. In that case, yeah, we're gonna take a little bit of prep of our food for now. Oh, sorry, what's that? All right, taking some prep. All right, that's it. Yeah, sorry. Actually, wait, give me like 2 more seconds. All right, that's it. Everybody ready? Yeah. Okay, cool. So let's start with an overview on their entire case. First, recognize that welfare as an institution is going to be an overall failure. What Michael Tanner of the Cato Institute explains is that despite spending nearly $1 trillion yearly to fight poverty, the poverty rate has risen to 15%, the highest level in nearly a decade. At that point, they have to give you a unique warrant why the new spending that they're doing is going to change the system so it works when it has literally never worked in the past. But then you're turning their case against them in 3 ways. The first is going to be wage depression. As John Slater of Focus LLC explains, the growth in welfare spending has made the depression of workers' wages economically sustainable because in the eyes of corporations, a low wage isn't as problematic and workers have welfare as a backup. In fact, he continues that welfare spending has become a subsidy for low-wage employers. That's hugely problematic because it means welfare just furthers the system of subjugation we outlined in the top of their case, which is obviously going to have racial implications as well, at the point where the rich white people that run the government are the reason this displacement happens in the first place, so we're looking with that term. But second is going to be dependency. What Paul Winfrey of Heritage Foundation explains is that the welfare system already creates dependency by offering generous entitlements which make it feasible to not work at all. That's impacted out empirically first by Permanent Fessler of the European Central Bank, who finds empirically that because of dependency, an increase in welfare spending empirically increases inequality. But second, what Martin Floden of the Stockholm School of Economics finds is that by discouraging saving and finding work, strictly means-tested programs increase the percent of assets owned by the richest by 28%. That's the biggest and clearest impacting in the entire round, and it's the first place you're going to be voting. But third is going to be political harms. What Walter Korpi of the Swedish Institute for Social Research explains is that earnings-related benefits like means-tested welfare increase inequality by creating diverging interest among different income groups, making it less likely recipients of welfare as a whole can come together to work towards decreasing inequality. And remember that at the end of the day, the biggest impact is going to be a political solution. Remember what Reich tells you, the only way to solve inequality is a political solution. The only thing they do is delay inequality, but any impacts that we redo that link into politics mean those are going to be the first places that you vote. But now let's go down to specifically their phrase. First is about entrenching racism. What Sam tells you in Crossfire is very important, which is that if this were true, it would justify literally never spending on on infrastructure, right? If you bought this argument, it's like justifies never increasing our infrastructure spending from here on out, which simply doesn't make sense. But second, you can turn the argument against them, because even people that are being displaced, even people that are subjugated, can still benefit from infrastructure in richer areas, because again, then it's going to be easier to get jobs. Like if there's a road leading out of a richer city, then it's still easier for a poor person to access. But third, you can turn the argument because it means that because we're going to be solving this argument better. You can classify the bunker analysis that policies that a majority of the population wants are better represented in government when you revitalize the middle class. At that point, we actually solve that for all this institutional racism when you vote for us, because we're passing policies now that represent a majority of the people. But fourth, and most importantly, recognize that highways and light rails, all of these things are already existent in rich neighborhoods. At that point, at the point in our country's development, it makes literally no sense for the government to go, let's only build in rich neighborhoods. They have all the highways, they have all the light rails. At that point, literally the only place we have left where we still need infrastructure is those poor communities, which is why it's very clear and very possible that our advocacy has to be you invest in those poor communities. This makes a lot of sense, right? We're obviously not going to be building new highways in rich areas that are already flooded with highways. At that point, you're turning the argument against them again. But now let's get down to the contention two, where they talk specifically about the safety net. The first thing they talk about is jobs. Classify the two studies that we reviewed in the overview, first Fessler and that second Floden. That's going to be crucial because they're looking at more countries than the United States, which means they have more data, which means you prefer them against the one study from New York Times that they review. It's clearly telling you that dependency is going to go up and are the biggest terms on the case. But then they go into the cycle of poverty idea. And the main way they link in is this brain development issue, and that's essentially a health or a lives impact, which means that if we're linking into health and lives better than they are, then we're going to be having a bigger impact when it comes to their second warrant. First, you can look to Beauchamp Huang of the Southeastern Transportation Center, who finds that improving road pavement quality by 1 unit out of 5 would decrease accidents by 41% because it makes driving smoother and easier. And second, Alexandra McMillan of the University of Auckland, who furthers that investing in additional bike lanes in cities would decrease injuries by 50% because people would switch to bikes and get off crowded roads. Obviously, things like brain development are an issue, but at the point where we're having safe roads and people are living longer, if a poor family is losing a primary income earner, that's a much bigger impact than what they're going for here, which means we're outweighing with our links into health. But now let's go to the third warrant, where they talk about entrepreneurship. Recognize the study they read is just talking about an initial increase in it. They don't prove to you that this entrepreneurship remains for long, especially considering the two dependency terms we read. But second, recognize for a majority of poor people, this is going to be like absolutely absurd. People that are really deeply in poverty can't afford to start their own business until you have infrastructure to get the benefits that rich communities can give to those people. For these reasons, it's very clear that you're voting affirmative.
All right, and we'll start prepping. Actually, I can prep while.
Yeah, you can. So, cool. 1 sec. So here, sorry, can you real quick repeat?
Yeah, light rail, bunker, and right at the bottom.
Light.
25% stuff.
Got it.
Yep.
Which exact part of right did you want?
The last one.
Yeah, like that if we don't increase democratic participation, then inequality is going to be joined by the government.
Okay, sure. So I have those. So this is like kind of, it's like this last paragraph is the main thing for Reich. And then here's property values, here's middle class.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, you can, can we hold on this for just a second?
Yeah, sure.
Actually, we're on like 5 more seconds. Yeah, 5. It'll be down to case, and if time remains, it'll probably just be like an extension. You can just float it under our contention too. Okay. Slide those. Yeah. Let's start with our analysis about how dealing with the middle class is the most important. The evidence doesn't say that it's the best way to reduce income inequality. It says that it is a good way, but even then, if solving poverty is the second best way, but we prove that infrastructure doesn't solve the middle class problems that they talk about, we still link into their solvency better. It doesn't indicate that we can only look toward the middle class. We can still solve for other problems and just not have the best and most effective way, especially because we're going to contend that infrastructure doesn't do that as well. But then, the CDF indicates that people are 3 times more likely to be poor at some point in life after experiencing poverty early in life. And this is key because the only way to boost people up into the middle class in an intergenerational gap and solve for the long term, which is not just one generation, but generations far down the road, is to create a sustainable long-term alleviation of poverty. And the only way to do that is with these safety net, which means in the long run, we're also linking in there. But now let's go to the 3 words. The first one is on reducing costs for families. And they say that families will save like $6,000 from alleviating congestion because of like car maintenance problems. But they don't meet the threshold to deal with 100% of congestion, so they don't get all of those impacts, specifically because Greg Gibb of the Wall Street Journal explains that federal investments are poorly targeted as the existing system tends to favor new projects, even if the status quo is in dire need of repairs to existing infrastructure. This means we don't deal with more congestion, we just build unnecessary roads and bridges that don't go anywhere in order to like increase political popularity. Andrew Smith of the US History Review, our organization, indicates that spending would only increase maintenance backlogs as money is dumped into the most expensive possible solutions 99% of the time, which indicates that they don't get that $6,000 impact. And even if they do, they don't contextualize that in terms of how it boosts the middle class, considering that the middle class wages and median income is like way further than like $6,000, and it's not really a negligible, it's like a negligible impact. And then let's go to the second argument where they talk about property values, and they give you this like light rail evidence that says that like it would boost property values by 25%, but they don't prove to you like the probability that increased spending on infrastructure goes specifically to these light rails, and even that they don't prove to you how property values interact with income inequality. Just because like my house is worth more doesn't mean that my income is higher or my human capital development is any better. But what does matter in context of inequality is rent prices, because people can actually be displaced from their homes, and the apartment evidence we give you in case says that when people get displaced, their cost of living are 53% higher. And what's key is because of the same warrant that they give you, Barry Bluestone of the Northeastern University says that when infrastructure connects cities to external prices, that subsequently 74% of neighborhood studies transit investment causes rent prices in the area to rise faster than the rest of the city, which means the poor are pushed out while the rich probably still stay in the area, and that links into our advocacy better. But now let's go to the third one where they talk about jobs. The first thing that you need to recognize is that all jobs are good for inequality. Brian Halvin of UC Davis writes that low-wage employment worsens inequality by trapping the poor and making upward mobility impossible. Infrastructure jobs do exactly that, and there's 2 warrants. First is informal unemployment. Yvonne Liu of the Public Research Organization observes that compared to other sectors, infrastructure employers are twice as likely to keep workers unclassified on official payrolls, and as a result, informal workers earn half of what their formal counterparts do and are 3 times more likely to live in poverty, which is why Bachetta of the WTO furthers that informal workers have fewer opportunities for formal education and human capital growth, creating a poverty trap. It concludes that a 3% increase in the size of the informal economy raises income inequality by 8%. But second is P3s. Alexander Miletovich of Yale indicates that governments allocate funding for new projects by contracting out construction to private businesses in what's known as a public-private partnership, or P3. And this is bad because the Partnership for Working Families writes that private companies naturally seek to maximize profit, which incentivizes cutting corners to reduce wages. And as a result, the Organization for the American Way finds that only 8% of contracted workers earned enough to put themselves above the poverty threshold. The cumulative impact of both arguments comes from Tarnowski of the University of Washington, who enumerates that an increase in infrastructure investment increases income inequality in a holistic analysis by 8.5%. Then they say that FDI increases infrastructure, but the IMF writes that FDI goes to higher skill sectors of the economy and benefits the rich, which is why the IZA finds that a 1% increase in inequality, FDI increases income inequality by 0.2%. But then you extend Lieberfried's case that says that sudden poverty makes people short-sighted. They don't want to go out and find jobs because they have to deal with their basic needs first. That's why you need to expand welfare. But now quickly, as an underview, realize that a lot of his arguments about dependency are solved by more spending. Merrill of the National Center for Policy Analysis writes that a lack of funding is what is impeding welfare and workfare reforms. Chiefly elected officials complain that too few jobs are available for their welfare recipients and that more federal money would help solve this problem. Empirically, California's failure to enact workfare reform was explained through criticisms of being too expensive for the state. When you increase funding, then workfare reforms get pushed through Congress, and as a result, people are required to go out and get a job that solves back for their dependency impact and their political exploitation impact, and that's why you're going to be negated.